With the help of Hashem, we are learning Rosh Hashana Daf Dalid. We are continuing to learn the sugya of Daryavesh, the Persian, who, as we established, was called by the Jewish people for a time, initially, with the name Kodesh. And Kodesh also connotes that we considered him, at least initially, to be a Melech Kosher. And therefore, the Gemara explained that even though we accept the ruling of Rab Chizda, that when the Mishnah says Be'echad b'Nisan is Rosh Hashana l'Malachim, it only refers to Malchei Yisrael. Malchei Umas Ha'olam are counted from Echad b'Tishrei. When it comes to Daryavesh, initially we marked his Rosh Hashana like Malchei Yisrael Be'echad b'Nisan. Even though we proved that when Nach speaks about him concluding Ezra leaving the Golus, and then him arriving in Yerushalayim with his group, and we are referring to the year of the reign of Daryavesh, and there it's clear that we are marking Echad b'Tishrei to be the Rosh Hashana for his reign, and the Gemara concluded that correct, that there was a period of time where Shehechmitz, which means that he soured, from when we considered him to have soured, we went back to mark his Rosh Hashana as we do for all the Malchei Umas Ha'olam. And the Gemara is going to challenge that. We're going to have various proofs that indeed that Kodesh or Daryavesh, the Persian, Hechmitz, he soured, he lowered substantially his moral behavior, and therefore we no longer gave him the kavod of marking the year of his reign from Echad b'Nisan. Now we're going to learn because of that a very interesting topic, and that is, the Chazal tell us that if a person gives tzedakah, I'm giving this to tzedakah in order for my child to live. In other words, it sounds like he's doing a mitzvah for self-serving motivations. Chazal say, Harei ze tzadik gomer. We consider this person to be a complete tzaddik, and we're going to have a very big innovation that it really has to do with the intent of the person who gave the tzedakah, even though the words will be the same. I'm giving this money for tzedakah in order for so-and-so to be well, or for that and that to happen. If the person's kavanah is that regardless what will happen, I'll be happy that I did the mitzvah, indeed, that's a tzaddik gomer. It's a complete tzaddik. But if a person will regret doing the mitzvah, if whatever this person desired to happen did not, then we don't consider that act to be an act of tzaddik gomer. Adarabba, we consider that to be a self-serving person, and that's going to lead back to Kodesh's, or really Daryavesh, the Persian's, tremendous amount of tzedakah that he gave. Nevertheless, he gave it for a condition, and it was a self-motivating condition, and if his condition would not have been fulfilled, he would have regretted it. That's going to be, as we will see, one of the reasons why we no longer considered him to be a Melech Kosher. We're going to clarify the meaning of Shaygal. We had a verse on Daf Gimel Amud Beis, where when he was sitting, this is already in his 20th year of his reign, his Shaygal, his consort, was sitting beside him, and we'll see various interpretation what that means. And on Daf Dalid, Amud Aleph, towards the end of the Amid, the Gemara is going to refer back to the opening Mishnah, and we're going to focus on the second din in the Mishnah, that's Be'echad b'Nisan, Rosh Hashana, Lorry Golem, for the holidays. And as we already spoke out in brief, when we learned the Mishnah, it says in Parshas Kisei that when a person makes a vow to bring a sacrifice in the Holy Temple, even though, of course, ideally bring it ASAP, but there is a certain point that if the person does not bring it, they will be violating the negative commandment known as Bal Ta'achar, which means do not delay it. When is one violating Bal Ta'achar? We will really learn that our Mishnah follows the Tana Reb Shimon, but there's going to be 5 different opinions amongst the Tanoim when that violation goes into effect. We're going to be learning about the concept of tashlumin, compensation. When it comes to the 3 holidays, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot, we, the men who are obligated to go there, aren't only obligated to be there, but we have to come there with 2 sacrifices, with one that's called a oilas re'iyah, or carbon oila, a fully burned carbon, that is connected for us seeing and being seen by God in the temple. There is another sacrifice that's known, shalmei chagiga, part of which is eaten by the person who brought it and his extended family. He can share it with whomever he likes, as long as they consume it in the old city in Yerushalayim and HaKodesh. These two sacrifices ideally should be brought on the first day of Yom Tiv. If the person did not bring it ideally on the first day, they can compensate by bringing it for the next 6 days. Or in other words, there's a total of 7 days when one can bring these sacrifices. That's called compensation. And we're going to learn that the holiday of Shavuos, that biblically only has 1 day, even though the day after is Bechlal, not Yom Tiv, not even Chol HaMoed, but we also have the concept of compensation, that if a person did not bring these two sacrifices as they should have on the first day, they can compensate it for the next 6 days. And by the way, until today, we don't say Tachnun not only from Shavuos, but until Yud Beis Sivan, because these are days that are designated to make compensation for the sacrifices if the person did not bring it in the ideal state. We're going to learn from where do we know that Shavuos has the compensation. We're going to review something regarding Shmini Atzeres, that Shmini Atzeres is considered a holiday for itself, not for everything a continuation of Sukkos, and actually there are 6 halachis for which Shmini Atzeres is considered a holiday for itself. There's the mnemonic of Pizar Kishav. We had this in Sukkah, we had this before. We're going to review this, God willing, today, and we're going to apply this general rule of Tofasta Meruba Loi Tofasta, Tofasta Miyuta Tofasta, that sometimes the rule is that if you go for everything, you might go broke. If you grab too much, you might grab nothing at all. If you grab something lesser than everything, then you will succeed. And we will see how this applies to our sugya and much, much more. We left off on Daf Gimel Amid Beis, the last line in the Amid, the end of the Amid. Again, we clarified that Kuresh or Dayavish the Persian at some point soured, and that's why we began counting his years from the first day of Nisan, and then we went to count his years of reign like we do for all non-Jewish kings from Echad B'Tishrei. Maskiv L'Rav Kahana. How can you say? Now this resolved the verse that was speaking about Ezra's journeying to the Holy Land, that he left during the 6th year of his reign. He arrived 18 months later, but during the 7th year of his reign. And he went over 2 Nisans, but only 1 Tishrei. So we are saying that during that time when Ezra journeyed, by then Kuresh was already soured, he was already a non-righteous king. How can that be? But doesn't it say, Daf Daled on the top, that at that time he asked, Umah Chashchan, you let me know, Rashi says, you let me know what exactly is missing. Whatever they require, I will make sure that it will be supplied for in the Holy Temple. And he mentioned the details. This is the king. What's missing? What do you need? If you need B'nai Torah and young bulls, I'll give it to you. This is from the government. V'dichrin and rams, v'imrin and sheep. And all of it should be used le'elavan, le'elokah, shemaya, to be brought up as burnt offerings to the God in heaven. Chintin, wheat, melach, salt, chamar, wine, neshach, oil, kemeimar, koihanayo, dibi Yerushalayim, whatever the koihanim in Yerushalayim say the Holy Temple needs, lehevu misyoiv lohen, should be given to them, yoim yoim, every single day, di loy shalom, without fail. So even during that time, he was supporting the maintenance of the Holy Temple, and that was a big bill to foot. So you're telling me that he was already hechmetz? Look at how much money he was giving to Hashem. So answers the Gemara, Amar loy Rabbi Yitzchak, Rebbe, from you, Rebbe Yurav Kahana, you asked a question from these verses in Ezra. Open up these verses. Mitunach means from your bundle. Look inside your source. Let's keep on reading and you'll get their answer. What does it say over there? That he continued to say that di lehevoin mahakrivin nechoichen, that these should be offered as pleasing sacrifices le'elokah to the God in heaven, umatzlin, and they should pray l'chaye malka, for the life of the king, ubenoi, and for the life of the king's family. In other words, he linked that donation for them to daven and give a bracha for him and for his family. In other words, Since he was not giving it selflessly, he was giving tremendous amounts of money, but he says, but I want you guys to pray for me. That means he's sour. That means, you see, he's not kosher. It was a self-serving mitzvah. The Gemara counters, what are you talking about? Is a person not meritorious? Even if they give tzedakah contingent on, please pray for me, did we not learn v'hatanya? We have this in Psachim, we have this in Bava Basra, that ha'omer sela zula tzedakah. If a person gives a sela to tzedakah, and he says, bishvil, I'm giving this in order, sheyichyu b'ni, for my son to live. Or, bishvil she'eska ba l'chaya ha'olam haba, I want to merit the world to come. So Chazal tell us, harei zet tzadik gomer. That's a complete tzaddik. So why are we saying that he soured because he did that? So the Gemara says, like kasha kan the braisa harei zet tzadik gomer is speaking about Bi Yisrael. If a Jew makes such a donation, what's unique about the Yisrael? Says Rashi, at the end of the wide lines, going into the first narrow line on top of the Amid, the fifth line from the top, Sheliboy la shamayim. When a Jew gives tzedakah, he's giving it to God. And v'im miriim leibachayav, and if whatever his request was does not happen, his child, God forbid, does not live, etc. Einoi koiro loy tagor. He's not going to say, God, you tricked me. I regret giving tzedakah. He'll never say that. Elo toira hayisurim ba'avoini. He'll say, I was not meritorious. I made a sin. I did something that for some hashgacha pratis, I needed to undergo that challenge. In other words, there's nothing wrong you linking a request to a mitzvah, as long as if your request does not happen the way you wanted it, you're not going to regret doing the mitzvah. I'm just reading inside the Rashi. If they don't get what they asked for, they're going to criticize God. That is where we say that giving tzedakah, linking it to a self-serving request, that already is not. We don't consider that person to be meritorious. That's a tit for tat. That's a person who's doing something for his own personal reasons. Back inside Kambo Evdei Kechavim. Now, look inside the top Tosfos. Now we are saying that a Yisrael, as long as liboy lashamayim, as long as he's doing it for God, no matter what, he'll be happy he did a mitzvah. That's okay. So asks Tosfos, don't we learn in Masechta Avos? I'm reading inside the Tosfos. Al tiyu ka'avadim hamisham shemesarav al manas lakal pras. Don't be like servants who serve the master in order to get a reward. What does that mean? So answers Tosfos, it must be haynu b'umas ha'olam. That Mishnah is only referring to non-Jewish people. Now that can be, Pirkei Avos was not written for non-Jewish people, so the Marsha over here, he amends, he adds in the Tosfos that Hainu ke'ein umas ha'olam. What Tosfos means to say is, linking it to the Mishnah, that it isn't just Yisrael and umas ha'olam. If a Jew who's doing a mitzvah, in our case giving tzedakah, for a merit, I want my child to live. If that Jew will regret giving tzedakah, if his child doesn't live, that's what the Mishnah is saying. Don't serve God that way. But if a person is doing a mitzvah, and no matter the outcome for their person or what they want to happen, they're going to be content that they did the mitzvah, then there's nothing wrong you giving a tzedakah and saying, I'm giving this in order for so-and-so, l'refuah shalema, k'minig Yisrael. Gewaldig. Okay, back inside over here. Now the Gemara says, "V'iba yisema minolam da'achman." I have another source that indeed that Daryavish the Persian, he soured at a certain point. How do we know that? Because regarding how he built the Beis Hamikdash, he requested that nidbachin the even galol tulasa. He says that I would like for 3 rows in the temple proper to be made out of marble, out of stone. And v'nidbach, and 1 row, the chadat. We know from the Tanya. If the log is not catching fire, then you got to splinter it. Means wood. 1 row should be made out of new wood. In other words, he made sure that wood should be built in the building. And he said that the nafkas and all of the expenses for the building, min beis malkot Yisrael, should be given from the house of the king, from the federal government. But he wanted to make sure that they put 3 rows of stone, but then there should be a row of wood. And lamalei da'avad hachi. Why did he put wood in there at all? Why would he not build the entire building out of stone? You know why? He thought to himself that that if the Jewish people will rebel against me or against Persia, then I want to be able to burn it down. So since, even though he gave money and he built it, but he always had it in his mind that if I won't be happy with what they're doing, I'm going to burn it down. So just because he gave money, we don't consider him to be a righteous person. Adarabba, hechmetz. He had that as an option. There's a problem putting wood into the holy temple. What, King Solomon did not do that? It says in Melachim, mamish the same thing, that when Shlomo HaMelech built the first temple, 3 rows were made out of stone or cut stone, and the tur, and 1 row afterwards was 3-1, 3-1, 3-1 was kirusais arazim, where were cedar beams. He also built wood into it. So the Gemara answers, Shlomo Ovid Milmaila. The literal pshat is that Shlomo HaMelech put the wooden part on the top, not on the bottom. It was high. And Ve'io and the Kuresh, Daryavish, the Persian Ovid Milmata, he built it in the bottom. If you build wood on the top, even if the wood burns, the building will not collapse. If the wood is in the bottom or towards the bottom, then indeed, when you burn the wood, the whole building will collapse. You can say homiletically that Shlomo HaMelech Ovid Milmaila, he did what God told him to do, as we know. So the Eibishter wanted to build it in there. His intention wasn't, God forbid, for anything to happen to the Beis HaMikdash. That him, Daryavish, he Milmata, he was his own mind that decided how to build it. And why did he do it? He did it because he wanted to have the option of, God forbid, burning down the temple. Another difference. Shlomo Shaki Bibinyana. Shlomo made sure that the wood is completely recessed into the building. And he did not put the wood recessed in. He had it all the way to the outside, again, making sure that you could burn it down. Another third difference, Shlomo Sadiyeh B'Sidon. Shlomo HaMelech plastered it with lime. And he did not plaster it all for the same concept that for whatever advantage there is in putting in wood, and there is, he used that to the disadvantage of having an option of burning it down. Now we're going to have a third source, that Rabbi Yosef or others say that Rabbi Yitzchak minalon da achmetz mahachat. They have a third source from where we know that Daryavish soured, became a non-righteous king. It says, Vayem Elyahu HaMelech, we quoted this yesterday, now this is many years later, but so what? Now we're going already into the 20th year of his rule. That when this Nehemiah had this interaction with the king, so the king was telling me, and it says, Vahashaygal, Yoisheves Etzloi, the consort, no, like the concubine, that's the normal pshat. Really, it should be a queen that's sitting next to the king. And my shaygal, what does that mean? Amar Abba Bar Lima, or Bar Lema, in the name of Rav Kalbasa, that at that time already, he had his female dog, who he mamish married. And she was sitting next to him. And bestiality, without shame, is included in one of the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach. I'm just saying that, as we spoke at the end of last class, that even though today we would have paskind that this Daryavish has a din of a Yid because his mother was Esther HaMalka, according to most historians, Jewish historians, rabbinic historians, nevertheless, then the accepted was that you are Jewish only if both parents are Jewish. And even though he had a din of a non-Jew, but a non-Jew cannot have relations with the dog. The Gemara Elama'ata, that whenever Nach uses the words Shaygal, how do you interpret Hadirsiv? Va'almara Shemaya Hisrei Mamt. This is Daniel speaking to King Belshazzar. This is still when the Babylonians were on top. And he was criticizing him, that you exalted yourself against Hashem. How did you do that, King Belshazzar? Because the vessels of the holy temple that was captured when the first temple was destroyed, that was brought into Babel. These kings, every now and then, they would actually bring out those utensils, and they would, they brought it in front of you, and you used it. And who used the temple, the kalim of the Beis HaMikdash? You. This is what Daniel is telling this Babylonian king. V'rav Revanach, and all of your nobles, and Sheglasach, here again Shaygal, and your consorts, V'lechanasach, and your concubines, Chamra Shasen behind wine did you drink in them? Now, if the Shaygal means Kalbasahi, if Shaygal means a dog, Kalbasa Bas Mishtaya Chamrahi, does a dog drink wine in a cup from a keli. So the Gemara says, no, that's not a kasha. Hole kasha, the last narrow line, yeah, it was a dog. Could be there also shaglasa or sheglasach, means the dogs that they somehow they elevated to a status of a wife, and they trained them. The malchus lavashasya, that you can train a dog and it can behave in this area like a person by drinking wine in a cup. Elamata, another problem. When it says, and these are psukim that are foretelling the greatness that will be bestowed upon the Jewish people in the future, that benois melachim bikroisecha, the daughters of kings, will honor you. Mitzvah shaygal yiminecha, the shaygal will be sitting on your right. Bikesem oifir, in gold from oifir. Now, the shaygal kalbasa, if shaygal means a female dog, makom avasul l'noveli Yisrael. God forbid, what in the future we are going to be sitting with the shaygal to our right. So the Gemara says, hachi ka'amar, beschar shechaviva toida liYisrael ki shaygal lo'evdek echavim. As it became certain times in history, this illness of people becoming, they mamish like married their dogs. So it's like a metaphor that just like the Jewish people opted in making Torah beloved to them, the way other nations made their dogs beloved to them, because of that, zechisam lekesam oifir, you'll merit to have up as golden garments or golden jewelry. Okay. So still, we just are insisting that shaygal can mean a kalbasa. The iba yisema, lo'olam shaygal malkasehi. No, shaygal means a queen. The Rabba Bar Lema that said that this king at that time was sitting with a dog sitting in the throne of the queen. Gemara Gamerla, he had such a tradition that the queen by him was his dog. And Va'amai Karolo Shaygal. Now shaygal means a consort or a queen. Why are we calling the dog a shaygal? Shoise chaviva olav kishaygal, because he loved it the way a person would love his queen. Or inami shehoishiva b'makim shaygal, because this person had the craziness of putting the dog the way another king would put his queen next to him. For him, he put a shaygal next to him, and that's why we use this expression. And now the final proof that Daryavesh soured, became a non-righteous person. When here again, he is supplying the maintenance of the holy temple, and at kesef kikrin meya. So he told Ezra about the quantities that may be given to the temple upkeep. He says up to 100 talents of silver. Va'at chintin koren meya, and up to 100 kor of wheat. Va'at chamar batin meya. Batin is a certain measurement. Bath is 3 sa'ah, that you can give up to 100 baths of wine. Va'at batin meshach meya, another 100 baths of oil. Umalach di loiksaf, salt with no limit. In other words, he was giving a lot, but he put a limit to everything other than to salt. So me'ikara, at first, when he began to give money to the holy temple, b'loi kitzusa, he did not set a limit. Hashta, now he's setting a limit. Aha, hechmetz, he's souring. So the Gemara says, no, that's no proof at all. The Dilma maybe me'ikara, in the beginning of the Second Temple era, lo have a kimle bikitzusa. He did not know how much the temple needs, so he never put a limit. Many years into it, he knew he averaged how much they need, and he didn't want for people to take advantage from the federal reserves. So he gave a limit because he knew this is what they need. It doesn't prove that he soured. And therefore, Ela Machavarta, the wider answer is Kiddushanyan Meikara, using all the ones above. Bottom line is that even though Malchei Umas Ha'olam, their Malchus is counted be'echad b'tishrei, if and when there is a king that's not Jewish, but we considered him to be righteous, we honored him by counting his reign from echad b'nisan, and there could be a king like it was with Daryavesh, that he went through phases. There was a time that he was more righteous, and then there was a time that he became less righteous, and therefore we changed the count of his kingship accordingly. Givaldik. And with this we end the sugya, and now we're going back to the Mishnah. First day of Nisan marks the Rosh Hashana, the Lorry Golem, for the Jewish holidays. Now, just to know, literally, regel means a leg. We are supposed to go to the Holy Temple by foot. Even people that would travel on horse and buggy all the way to the mountains around Yerushalayim, they would walk up. They would walk to the Holy Land. And therefore, the stories of a chassid from the Alter Rebbe, he only went to the Rebbe by foot. He would never travel to the Alter Rebbe going on a horse and buggy. because it's similar, the mitzvah of going to the Holy Temple and going to be together with one's Rebbe over Yom Tov. Noch in his elder years, when he was unable to walk, he'd stopped going. So they told him, if you can't walk anymore, why didn't you at least go on the horse and buggy? So he says, when I'm going to come to the next world, they're going to want to reward me for going to visit my Rebbe. If I'm going with the horse, I don't want me and my horse to be rewarded together. Anyway, so Lorry Golem, the Golem refers to Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkos. Now the Torah says in Parshas Kisitze, and we're going to learn a lot about this verse, this daf and the next daf. The pasuk says that Kisidoir neder l'Hashem Elokecha. When you make a vow, we will see soon, it's not only regarding sacrifices that you opted in by making a vow. It's going to cover many types of obligations that a Jew might have for the Holy Temple. The Torah says, Lo yisa'acher l'shalmoi. Do not delay in paying your vow. The Torah says the words loy. We're going to use the words bal. It means the same thing, bal ta'achar. When do you violate bal ta'achar? As we will see, according to one of the 5 opinions, only after 3 holidays go by after your vow, but the 3 holidays have to be counted with Pesach being the first. In other words, if a person made a vow after Pesach to offer a carbon shlamim, you know how many Yomim Tovim they will have until they'll violate? They're going to have 5 Yomim Tovim. Shavuos, Sukkos, Pesach has to be the first. Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkos. And that's the meaning that on the Echad ben Nisan is the Rosh Hashana, Lorry Golem. When will you violate Bal Ta'achar? Not only when 3 holidays go by and you didn't pay your pledges. No, when 3 holidays go by, Pesach being the first. But here's the problem. If we are focusing on the holidays, Pesach is not on the first day of Nisan. Pesach is on the 15th of Nisan. So, fragt die Gemara, Lorry Golem, be'echad ben Nisan hu. That's b'chamish aser ben Nisan. Pesach is on the 15th of Nisan. Who? Answers the Gemara, Amar Rab Chizda, Regel, Sheboy, Rosh Hashana, Lorry Golem. And let me word this the way we began the Masechta, according to the way Hasidus explains the power of Rosh Hashana. Rosh Hashana doesn't mean the beginning of the year. Rosh Hashana means the head of the year. Everything in the year is included in the head of the year. So Echad ben Nisan is Rosh Hashana. In Echad ben Nisan, you have the 15th of Nisan, because everything that will happen in the month is in the head of the month. That's the pshat. No, it's Echad ben Nisan. Rosh Hashana is Echad ben Nisan, or Echad b'Tishrei, or Echad be'Elul, or Echad b'Shvat, or Tu b'Shvat. These are the Rosh Hashanas. Just because the Yom Tov B'Poyel manifests in the 15th, it's included be'Echad ben Nisan. It's be'Echad ben Nisan Rosh Hashana Lorry Golem. Now, nafkamina, okay, so what does it mean? What's the halachic implication? L'noider, if a person makes a vow, when will you violate Bal Ta'achar? As we will see, this is exclusively the opinion of Rabbi Shimon by having 3 Yomim Tovim go by and Pesach being the first. And now the Tanya. We learned in a Braisa, Echad HaNoider, the word Noider here means if a person says, I pledge to give my value, Dami Olai, my value I will give to the Holy Temple, or your value, Damim. What does that mean, Damim? In those days there were slave markets, and the way we assessed how much a person is worth, even though a person has infinite value, but the way we would give a person some sort of financial value is by saying how much is that person worth in a slave market. And a person sometimes felt that their life was saved because of God, or they want to give all of themselves to God. So the way they express it is by saying, I'm giving all of my value to God. They made such a pledge. That's damim, or dami, or your value, his value, or her value. Or magdish, if a person specifies to an item, this item I'm consecrating to God. Or if a person makes a pledge by using the words erech, hama'arech. Now this is a parsha that we'll learn a whole masechtas about it. If you use the word assessment, then the Torah gives, depending on your age and gender, a specified amount, regardless how much you are worth in the slave market. But these are different types of pledges that people can make. So if a person makes a pledge, first of all, pay it as soon as possible. And that's especially true, as we will see in the sugya, that anyways a man is obligated to go to the Holy Temple 3 times a year, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot. So there is a positive commandment to pay down this pledge the first time you go there. L'kula alma. And if you didn't pay it down during the first holiday after your pledge, you violated the positive commandment. We want to know, when will this person violate the negative commandment of thou shalt not delay? Bal ta'achar. We'll use from now on the words bal ta'achar. So kivin sha'avru olav gimel regalim. According to the first version, according to the first Tana, the Tanach holds, sequence is irrelevant. No matter when you made the vow. After 3 Yomim Tovim go by, we're speaking only again about Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkos, then you violate Bal Ta'achar. But according to the Tanakama, obviously that's not the author of the Mishnah, has nothing to do with Pesach. If a person were to make the vow right now, now we're in Mar Cheshvan, then the first holiday will be Pesach. But if a person makes the vow, let's say, right before Tishrei, then they'll violate it after Shavuos, because then Sukkot went by, and Pesach went by, and Shavuos went by. Rab Shimon Omer, Gimel Regalim, but it has to be Kesidron. There has to be a sequence, and which one needs to be the first for you to say the third already went by and you didn't pay up? Now you're violating the Chag HaMatzah is Techila, and that is our Mishnah. And v'chein hoyer Rab Shimon ben Yochai Omer, and just to give everyone a rule, that whenever you learn about Rabbi Shimon, as a klal, stam, Rab Shimon is Rab Shimon ben Yochai. It's the same one, who says that regarding our Mishnah's rule, that you violate Bal Ta'achar when holidays go by, Pa'amim Gimel, Pa'amim Dalet, Pa'amim Chamisha. Sometimes you're going to violate after 3, sometimes 4, sometimes 5. Ketzad, not the Lifnei Pesach. If your vow was made before Pesach, I don't care if it's Isru Chag Sukkos or if it's Yud Daled Nisan. If you make your vow before Pesach, then indeed you will violate Bal Ta'achar by 3 Yomim Tovim, because Pesach is the first that went by without you paying up. If a person made his vow before Shavuos, then he's only going to violate Bal Ta'achar after 5 Yomim Tovim go by, because it's going to be Shavuos, it's going to be Sukkos. You're not even counting down yet. Then Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkos. And if a person made the vow before Chag, meaning before Sukkos, then the violation will happen after 4 Yomim Tovim. Okay. In other words, our Mishnah follows Reb Shimon, and now, second line before the bottom of the Amid, we're going to quote a lengthy Braisa. It's important to remember it also for Daf Hey. The Braisa is going to give all the different vows, all of them, for which, if you lingered by not paying it up, at a certain point, you're going to violate Bal Ta'achar. So first of all, this last Braisa on the Amid is going to give many other types of vows, and also it's here that we will have all of the 5 opinions amongst the Tanoim, exactly when are you going to violate Bal Ta'achar. So Tana Rabbanan, Chayavei Hadamin, we already explained. When a person says, my damim, my value, using the words damim, I'm gonna give to the temple, or your damim, or my child's damim, or whatever. Ve'ha'erchin is when you use the word erech, which means in English assessment, but that's a key word, and this word is of tremendous significance, because when a person pledges by giving the erech, it doesn't matter how much you are worth in the slave market. God prescribes for every person, and depending on his or her gender, depending on his or her age, a specified amount. Hacharamim is if a person uses the word chedem when they are making a pledge. Now there are some details about the word chedem. I know that sometimes chedem means excommunicating someone. It does not mean it over here. Chedem means that this item is no longer mine. It's chedem from me because I'm giving it to. Now, people also use the word chedem when they are making a pledge to give something to kohanim. And there's a machlokes that we'll have elsewhere, whether stam chedem lekohanim or stam chedem is lebedek habayis. Here we're speaking about a pledge to the bedek habayis. It's all about pledging money for the temple. Only in that context is there a violation of Bal Ta'achar. Or well, let's add, if you have a specific thing upon which you say, this I'm being magdish to God. Last line. Or if a person is obligated a chatos. In other words, it's not a pledge. They violated something for which they're chayiv to bring a chatos. Bring it, of course, as soon as possible. And again, when the first Yom Tov comes, you should definitely bring it. And if you don't, you're going to be violating the positive commandment. But when do you violate the negative commandment? So that's the topic. Chatois, or whether you've violated another sin for which you chayiv a carbon called a carbon asham, or oila, or a shlamim, or tzedakos. Now tzedakos means charitable pledges. Charitable pledges, as we will, God willing, learn on Daf Vav, is not so simple. Because charitable pledges, the person violates much quicker, much before as we'll see the different opinions, Bal Ta'achar. So we're gonna just say that we're gonna have to deal with this word tzedakos. Maisrois refers Rashi and Tosfos to Meiser Rishon, to Meiser Sheni, to Meiser Ani. Now hold on. Before we go on, for people that are familiar with Chitas and Parshas Kisavoy, the mitzvah of Biur Meisres, we know that when is a person obligated to finally give their Meisres to the respective recipients, so there's a deadline. The deadline is before Pesach, or before Achron Shel Pesach, we'll leave that for another time, on the 4th year, to give of all of the Meisres that was separated from the beginning of the 7-year cycle until then, and before Pesach of the 7th year. And that could mean that many, many more than 3 Yomim Tovim went by before a person is in violation. So Tosfos in the last Tosfos in the Amid addresses it. Meisres means Kagoin Meiser Rishon, Meiser Sheni, Meiser Ani. Uma shekava Aliyah ma'kosav zman biur. That which we find that there is a time where you have to get rid of it. As it says, he's quoting from Re'eh, Miksei Sholei Shonim Toitzi. And we know that Meiser Sheni, the deadline is Erev Yom Tov Harishon Shel Pesach. The Erev, the first day of Yom Tov, of the 4th year. And Erev Yom Tov of Pesach on the 7th year. That's the time when you have to get rid of it. That explains, Tosfos means that if you grew produce and it's still tevel, you're not touching it. You're not violating anything. So there's a deadline. There is these 2 times in the 7-year cycle. Now you have to separate the meisres. Obviously, Tosfos says you're only mechuyev if the produce is completed, as we learned so much at the end of the last Masechta. But the first wide line, once a person already separated Meiser Rishon or Meiser Sheni or Meiser Ani, then they don't have all the way until Erev Chag Pesach of the 4th year or of the 7th year to give it. No, then they are chayiv to give it way earlier, and if they don't, they're going to be violating Bal Ta'achad, as we'll see in a moment. That's a very important Tosfos to know. Back inside the Gemara, within the last line, Bechar. Bechar means when you have an animal that's born to you from domesticated animals. If the firstborn animal, the first emission or omission of the womb of the mother is a male animal, you have to give it to a kohen. The big question is this Braisa speaking about my obligation to give it to the kohen, or are we speaking about the kohen's obligation when the animal is not blemished to offer it as a carbon? But in one of these two, if there is too much time that went by without this being done, there's going to be a violation of, you delayed, Bal Ta'achar. Meiser means Meiser Behema. We just said Meiser before. Meiser Behema, as we just explained in the beginning of the Masechta, that all of the animals that are born into my domesticated herd this year, whether it's Echad Be'elul, whether it's Echad B'Tishrei, I gather, and every 10th one is holy to God. So here also there is a point where either you have to tithe it, or you have to offer it, and if not, you're going to be violating. You lingered, you delayed. Pesach, of course, is a problem. Pesach, Bal Ta'achar. What do you mean? If you don't bring Pesach on the 14th, you violated Bal Ta'achar because you can't bring it later. The Gemara is going to speak about that. We're going to have to come back to this Braisa and explain many of the cases mentioned, but let's go together and carbon Pesach. Dalid Amid Beis, Leket means that when a person is gleaning ears of grain, there are times that from the hand of the reaper, a small amount of individual ears fall down. We have to leave it to the poor. Shichacha means that when a person is gathering sheaves, if you are going systematically down the rows in your field and you went over, you forgot to gather a limited amount of sheaves, 1 or 2 sheaves, you have to leave it for the poor. Peah means that you have to leave an edge of your field, however the Torah determines a field, for the poor. Now really, these are items that have to be left for the poor. You're not giving it to the poor. But Tosfos says, if a person erroneously, b'mezid, b'shoigig, gathered it, I should have left the sheaves for the poor, but I didn't. I gathered it. Now I have to give it to the poor. Now it's in my possession. But I can't say, I made a mistake, it's mine, I have to give it to the poor. So there's a certain point after which, if you didn't give it to the poor, you violated Bal Ta'achar. Kivin, on all of the above. The Tanach holds, doesn't matter sequence. Kivin sha'avru alein, from when the pledge was made, from when you erroneously gathered the leket, once she'avru aleim shloisha regalim, then you are violating Bal Ta'achar. Opinion number 1, Tanach. It's not sequence, it's 3. Opinion number 2, which as we know is the Stam, our Mishnah. Rab Shimon Oimer shloisha regalim. I agree that there has to be dafka 3 holidays going over for you to violate Bal Ta'achar, but it has to be kesidran. There is a sequence to it, and which one has to be the first of the 3? The Chag HaMatzah is Tchila. Opinion number 3 is Rabbi Meir. He disagrees with 3. Rav Meir links the negative commandment to the positive commandment. Rav Meir says, Kivin she'avar aleim, even only regal echad, already you are also violating Bal Ta'achar, thou shalt not delay. Opinion number 4, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Oimer, Kivin she'avru aleim, shnei regalim, oiver b'Bal Ta'achar. First of all, there is no sequence, but unlike Rabbi Meir that links it to 1 Yom Tov, it's 2 Yomim Tovim. Again, it doesn't matter whether you made the pledge out of Yom Tov, whether you made it Matzei Sukkos, that's the biggest gap, and it's a Iber. Doesn't make a difference. You're going to violate either, according to Rav Meir, when Pesach finished and you didn't fulfill your pledge, or according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, when Shavuos is over. By the way, it's when the Yom Tov is over. And the 5th and the final opinion, Rabbi Elazar ben Rab Shimon Oimer, Kivin she'avar aleim chag hasukkos over aleim Bal Ta'achar. It's not about 1, it's not about 2, it's not about 3, it's dafka about sukkos. Which means if a person made a pledge before Pesach, in this case, 3 Yomim Tovim will have to go by. But we're not counting down. It's sukkos, dafka. When the entire sukkos went over and you didn't fulfill any of the above obligations, then you violated Bal Ta'achar. Don't delay fulfilling your pledge. End of Braisa. First, here on this Amid, we're going to go and look for the sources of all of these 5 opinions, and then on next daf, we're going to come back, and as we already mentioned, some of the cases that the Braisa gave will need further elaboration. Beginning with the Tanakama, fragting him on my Tama the Tanakama, that it has to be 3, but we don't care about the sequence. Now, not just for clarity, the verse that records God's negative mitzvah, Loi Sa'acher L'Shalmoi, is a pasuk in Parshas Kiseitze. What we're going to be using now, this is Torah Shebal Peh, we're going to a pasuk in Parshas Re'eh. That's not speaking about Bal Ta'achar. There's no mention of don't delay to bring the karbanis. That pasuk is telling us, first, we read this on Yom Tov. The Torah goes through all of the 3 Yomim Tovim, beginning with Pesach, and many laws about each one, concluding with the laws of Sukkos, and the mitzvahs connected to Sukkos, the gathering of the Dalad Minim, the mitzvah of sitting and dwelling in a Sukkah. And then after the Torah speaks about the specifics, the Torah writes like this, Shalosh pa'amim bashana, ye'roa kol zchurchas penei Hashem aleikecha. If the Torah would not have said which 3 Yomim Tovim, we would have understood which 3, because the Torah just listed all of the 3. The Torah could have just said, Shalish pa'amim bashana ye'ra kol zechurchas penei Hashem aleikecha. But God then adds, B'chag hamatzos, u'b'chag hashavuos, u'b'chag hasukkos. All 3 is completely superfluous. And then the Torah says, V'lo ye'ra es penei Hashem reikom, a person should not go and see God's hand, God's face empty-handed. The pshat, just to know, the pshat of that pasuk, not to come empty-handed, means that when you come for Yom Tov, you have to bring what we call a oilas re'iyah, a carbon oila, a carbon that's fully burnt. It's called the carbon of being seen, of seeing and being seen by God. That's the pshat. But now we're going to learn the drush. Not only al pidrush is this pasuk referring to the mitzvah of bringing the carbon oilas re'iyah. Really, the Torah is saying that when you come from these 3 Yomim Tovim, make sure you bring with you any and all of the other pledges, obligations that you have to give to God. Now, Michti Minayu Salik, the Torah already went through the details of the rules of Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkos. So, why did the Torah have to write the words Chag HaMatzos, Chag HaShavuos, Chag HaSukkos? These words are extra. If the Torah would not have written anything, if the Torah only would have written Shalish Pa'am Bashana Yirakos Churcha, Espenei Hashem Aleikecha, V'lo Yiroi Ponai Reikam, I would have known which 3. So from this, Shma Mina LeBal Ta'achar. That's it. So that's already a hint. aside of the mitzvah of bringing oilas re'iyam, when 3 yomim tovim go by and you didn't bring the other pledges, that is when you'll violate the negative commandment that's recorded in the Parshas Kiseitze. And it's not about the sequence. Yeah, of course, the Torah happens to mention Chag HaMatzos first, but it's any 3. That's the Tanach. Rab Shimon holds. Rab Shimon disagrees with the Tanach. Now, when the Torah there in the A goes through the 3 Yomim Tovim, the first one being Pesach, the second one being Shavuos, the third and the last one being Sukkos, Rab Shimon holds that even if the Torah decides to repeat the words, the Torah could have says that Shalosh Pa'alam Bashana Kol Zechur Chaspnei Hashem Alekecha. The Torah could have said U bechag hamatzos, U bechag hashavuos. All 3 are extra. But even if God wants to repeat these names of the holidays to hint, to give a remes of the love of Balta Achar, even now there's like another question. Don't say Chag HaSukkos. Meila Chag HaPesach or Chag HaMatzos, Meila Chag HaShavuos is in that parsha, but not immediately prior to this verse. Sukkos is the last Yom Tov mentioned, and we conclude right before the pasuk Shalish Pa'amim Bashana. You are speaking about Sukkos, so it's like a double question. If you want to add, don't add Sukkos. Sukkos means even if you want to repeat these names to hint to the Isur of Balta Achar, you could have done it without mentioning Sukkos. Why is Sukkos even more problematic? Because Shaboy Diber HaKosav, because this follows immediately the explanation of Sukkos. And Lama Nemar, not only did God repeat the names, but it also repeated Sukkos to tell you, and it has to be in the sequence. Chag HaMatzos is the first one, then Shavuos, and then Sukkos. Shezeh Achroin. Ubemel, if a person made a pledge in between Pesach and Shavuos, like we learned on Amud Aleph, according to Rab Shimon, you're going to violate Balta Achar after 5 Yomim Tovim go by. Shavuos went by, Sukkos went by, but Chag HaMatzos wasn't the first one. Chag HaSukkos is the last of the 3. Okay. Similar, but this added, even repeating, you don't have to write Chag HaSukkos. The third sheet in the Braisa was Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says there's no 3, no sequence, 1. Why? My tamo. Oh, so he's Gavaldik. So earlier in Parshas Re'eh, earlier in Devarim, Perek, Yud, Beis, Psukim 5 and 6. Pasuk 5 ends with the words Ubasa Shama. Pasuk 6 begins with the words Vahavesam Shama. Come there and bring there. This is the source of the positive commandment, that whenever you come to the Holy Temple, bring with you your pledges. And that Perek is speaking about the 3 Yomim Tovim. In other words, since Lokula Alma, you violate the positive commandment of when you go there, bring your pledge. Ubasa Shama v'havesam Shama. You're going to be violating the mitzvah saseh, says Rav Meir, so it makes sense. And if you didn't bring it, not only did you violate the positive commandment, you violated the negative commandment that's written in Parshas Kiseitze of Loisa Acher L'Shalmai or Balta Acher. V'Rabbanan meaning both the Tanakama and Rab Shimon, they are moide, they agree that the juxtaposition of the words Ubasa Shama followed by next verse that begins with the words Vahavesam Shama is taka telling you that there is a positive commandment that you violate even only after 1 Yom Tiv, but that's only for the positive commandment. So what? The negative commandment doesn't have to travel on the same track. How only la'aseh? And Rav Meir holds kiven the amalei rachmana aiseh v'lo yaiseh. If God is telling you to bring it as a positive commandment, it makes sense that you should therefore also be violating the negative commandment. Okay. Shita number 4. Tana number 4 in the... Yes?
Can you just explain how that works? So I violate the assay by not bringing it the first Yom Tov, but the next Yom Tov I bring it, so then I get my assay, so I cancel out.
Let me word it like this. Let me just point out what Danny is saying in different words. And we're not going to address this right now, just to bring up the question. Normally, the difference between a positive commandment and a negative commandment is, in consequence, is that for a violation of a positive commandment, there isn't a penalty. Sometimes you have to bring a carbon oil, but let's say flogging. Normally, for the violation of a negative commandment, we consider a violation of a negative something more severe, more serious, and the consequence is you're going to get malchus. However, we also know as a rule that any lav shenitak la'asei, you don't get malchus for. So if a person steals, God says, thou shalt not steal, but after a person, God forbid, stole, they're not going to get flogged because the Torah tells them, give back the money. As we will see, even when a person violated Baal Ta'achar, even if there was a specific animal that's already consecrated, the animal does not become invalid. The animal must be brought. And therefore, the person will not get malchus as long as there is the option of bringing that animal. So I would word it like this. The positive commandment, you violate after the first Yom Tov L'Kula Alma, but you're not going to get malchus. After 3 Yomim Tovim, you're violating a negative commandment, but don't say, and therefore you'll get malchus. Lav dafka. As long as you are able to bring it still, you won't violate the negative. But if something happens and you are unable to bring the animal, then you'll be chayiv malchus only after the Tanakama, 3 Yomim Tovim, L'Rab Shimon, 3 Chag HaSukkos at the last, and according to what Rabbi Meir, even only after 1 Yom Tov. Okay, Danny? Or as we have in the beginning of a Geras HaTshuva regarding the different types of tshuva that is needed. So for a mitzvah saseh, just tshuva is enough. For a lav, tshuva is not enough. Tshuva and Yom Kippur.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, like, when you think of, let's say, a mitzvah asay, like, if you didn't put on tefillin, you violated an asay, or whatever.
Yeah.
Right? But if you're supposed to give a korban, I didn't give it now, but I gave it the next holiday.
So
violated.
You violated that asay, and then you fixed it. It's different. It's a tshuva. In other words, it's not like I missed Shema. It's not mu'uves asher lo yuchal liskoin. Because my Shema of today is not the Shema of yesterday. Just because I say Shema today, if God forbid I missed yesterday, I missed. Here, I know it's not the same. But that's why I mentioned what I'm telling you, that even when you're over the lav, it's a lav that's considered that you can make up for. You could make it up. So even though a person violated the lav, they're not going to always get malchus that quick. Okay, let's go weiter. Now, what's the fourth shita? Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov holds, again, 2 Yomim Tovim, my tamam. It's amazing how they have these limudim. So says the Gemara, the Chsiv, it says, and these are psukim at the end of Pinchas, after the Torah records all of the karbanos musaf. So the Torah says, Eile, these tasu lashem b'mayadechem, these karbanos musafs you should make, meaning you should bring to God during your holidays. And then the Torah adds the words levad minidrechem, aside of you bringing your pledged karbanos. Levad minidrechem, and Eila tasel Hashem bim moyadechem loshanabim. Miut moyadim. Whenever you speak in the plural form, the minimum of plural is 2. And the Torah links, the Gemara is not writing it, but right after it says the words Eila tasel Hashem moyadechem, it says levad minidrechem, remez, that when you violated Baal Ta'achar for not bringing your neder, when moyadechem go by. Now again, the Rabbanan, this Rabbanan will go to all 3, Tanakama, Rab Shimon, and Av Meir. What do they learn from the word Moyadechem? They learn something else. The fact that the Torah writes the words Bim Moyadechem, we will not focus on the plural expression, but we will focus on the fact that we are joining together all of the Moyadim that's mentioned in Pinchas, which includes Rosh Chodesh and all the others. Rosh Hashana, Yom Kippur, and the 3 Moyadim. Now, we are linking them together to teach you that Kol Moyadim Kulam Shavim Zelozeh Shekulam Mechaprem Al Tumas Migdashu Kadashav. So to be brief, Chavre, we will learn this extensively, God willing, when we learn the beginning of Masechta Shavuos. But appreciate the following, that during every musaf set of karbanos, there is the higot lachatos, the soyer lachatos. If we daven, even davening, learning chitas, you'll remember soyer lachatos. What does that chatos atone for? So it's very interesting. It's similar but not the same. Dafke on Rosh Chodesh, do we have a learning that if a person ate kachim, when the meat of kachim was tamei, one should not have done so. If that was done, it is for this that the he-goat that's brought on Rosh Chodesh brings atonement for. That's again when a person ate consecrated meat when the meat was tummy. Now, when it comes to the he-goat of all the other Yomim Tovim, it brings an atonement for something similar but not the same. There, the atonement is not if the meat is tummy. What happens if the meat was tahor, but the person was tummy? They ate a tamei person ate meat that's tahor, or if a tamei person entered an area in the temple that he or she was not allowed to enter. That's another type of sin. For that, we know that the se'idim, the he-goats that are brought on all the other Yomim Tovim, they bring atonement for that. Without the words moy adechem that combines them together, I would think dafka. The side of Rosh Chodesh only brings atonement for the mistake of eating meat when you are tahar, but the meat was tamei. The se'idim of all the other Yomim Tovim, that is lechatas in Musaf, brings about atonement for when the person is tamei, the person is tamei, and the food is starred, the place is starred. So the Torah says the words here, Eila tasal Hashem amayadechem, to tell you, shekula mechaprim al tumas mikdash ukadashu. They all bring atonement for everything. Every soir that's brought on Rosh Chodesh, on Rosh Hashana, on Yom Kippur, both atonement for the mistake of eating kachim when the meat was tamei, and for the person who was tamei that ate kachim that starred. For a person who's tamei that entered an area that he should not have entered. And now the final one, my tama, that he says what? What is his shita? What's the fifth shita? It's only about sukkos. It's only about sukkos. So he begins using the same logic of his father, which is that even though the Torah, you didn't have to repeat Chag HaMatzos, Chag HaShavuos, and Chag HaSukkos. But even if you want to repeat it, the one that's taka not needed is Chag HaSukkos, because you just spoke about Sukkos. The Torah could have said U b'Chag HaMatzos, U with the vav, U b'Chag HaShavuos. Rabbi Shimon Omer lo yomer Chag HaSukkos v'yeber HaKosev lo manem. Notes his question was just like his father's. His conclusion is different. His father, Rabbi Shimon, concluded to tell you that Sukkos is the last. So it's 3 in sequence. Sukkah is the last. He holds no 3. It's only about Sukkahs. If you made your pledge before Sukkahs, you violate after 1 Yom Tov. If you made your pledge before Shavuos, you violated 2 Yomim Tovim. It's all about Sukkahs. Okay. Now, the fact that they don't learn anything from the Torah's apparent superfluous repetition of the words in the A, Chag HaMatzos, Chag HaShavuos, Chag HaSukkos, Haiba Chag HaMatzos, what do they learn from it? So the Gemara answers, they use it as was taught by Rabbi Elazar, Amar Rabbi Oshia, like we spoke on in the introduction. Tashlumen means compensation. Oilas, now I want you to know that we're going to learn this in the beginning of Chagiga, Daf Ches, Daf Tes. The sources from where we learn that even though you were supposed to bring it on the first day of Yom Tov, you can compensate for a total week. That means that day plus 6 days. That is really psukim that we find connected to the Korban Chagiga. So whenever you're going to learn in Chazal about the Chagiga, it really also means the oilas re'iyah. What's the 2 types of sacrifices that you ideally should bring on the first day, even though we learned in Beitza, if it's Shabbos, lav dafka, you can bring it. But normally, theoretically, you bring korbanos on the first day, oilas re'iyah, and shalmei chagiga. And if you didn't bring it the first day, you can compensate for it. Now, don't forget that on Pesach, when you are compensating for it, you're doing it on the holiday, because the holiday is a 7-day holiday. When you compensated on Sukkot, you're doing it on the holiday. Shavuos only has 1 day. So one would have thought that there isn't an option of compensation when it comes to Atzeres, but there is. So minayin l'atzeres sheyesh letashlomen kol shiva. Kol shiva means 1 plus 6. Bring it on the 6th of Sivan. But if you didn't bring it for the next 6 days, Talmud Limit, it's learned from here. The Torah puts together Chag HaMatzos, Chag HaShavuos, and Chag HaSukkos. By putting these 3 together, we are comparing Chag HaShavuos to which one? To Chag HaMatzos. The Chag HaMatzos. My friends, the Pasuk puts together 3 holidays. Why don't we say compare Chag HaShavuos to Chag HaSukkos, and there'll be a different outcome? The Gemara is going to ask that in a moment. But compared to Chag HaMatzos, Chag HaMatzos, yesh lo tashlumin kol shiva, during all of the 7 days of Pesach, which means that even if you didn't bring it on the first day, you have another 6 days of Chag HaShavuos. Today it's always on the 6th of Sivan. If you did not bring the oilas re'iyah, if you did not bring the shalmei chagiga on the first day as you should have, yesh lo tashlumim kol shiva, you can compensate it for a total of, including the 6th of Sivan, a total of 7 days. Nice, I got it. So it's written to teach you the hekesh. But why are we comparing it to matzos? Why don't we compare it to sukkos? And you'll see it will make a difference. Because we're going to prove that on sukkos, the din of compensation isn't 1/6. It's 1 and 7, a total of 8 days. Even on Shmini Atzeres, one can still compensate for the oilas re'iyah they should have brought on the first day of Sukkot. So why do you compare it and add another day of potential compensation? Malahaloin, just like over there by Sukkos, you can bring the Oilas Re'iyah and the Shalmei Chagiga as compensation. It's not lechatchila, but b'di'evet for a total of 8 days. Say by Shavuos you have a total of 8 days. Today that would mean there will be yet another day without Tachnun. Even Yud Gimel there will be no Tachnun. So the Gemara says, no. Shmini regel b'fnei atzmayu. Who says you can bring the compensation of the Oilas Re'iyah, Shalmei Chagiga, on Shmini Atzeres? Shmini Atzeres is a separate yontiv. You can't bring it on Shmini Atzeres. Counters the Gemara, it's not true. It's true, for some dinim we consider Shmini Atzeres a yomtiv for itself. That's only regarding the 6 rules of Pizar Kishav. And Rashi chazers what we had in Yuma and what we had in Sukkah. Pei stands for the lottery. In other words, there was being that there were so many karbanis that were brought during the 7 days of Sukkot. We did not make lotteries to see which mishmar should be zoiche in bringing it, but they all brought it, and there was a rotation system. And it ended up at the end that aside of 2 of the 24 mishmaros, they brought over the Yom Tov 3 bulls. Only 2 mishmaros brought 2 bulls. So you would think that on Shmini Atzeres that there is 1 bull to bring. It should be divided only amongst the final 2. We don't do that. Everyone goes into the lottery. The Zayin means that you make Zman Shechechiyon. We say a Shechechiyon on Shmini Atzeres. The Reish, Rashi holds the Regel B'fnei Atzmai means that you don't say Chag HaSukkos Hazeh. You have another name to the holiday. Shmini Atzeres HaChag Hazeh. The Kuf stands for Karbanos. In other words, it doesn't follow the sequence of Karbanos. It's not 13, 12, 11, and then the last day of Sukkot is 7. It's not 6. It's 1. It's a different sequence. Shin means that the song, the content, the lyrics of the shiur, of the Levium, is not similar to whatever they were singing during Sukkot. And the Beis, according to Rashi, is a special bracha that they would give the king on the day of Yom Tov. On Shvi Shal Pesach, they wouldn't give a new bracha to the king, but on Shmini Atzeres they did. So true regarding these 6 laws, Shmini Atzeres is considered a Yom Tov for itself. Avali and Tashlumim, Divrei Yaakov Tashlumim Derishenu. No, you could bring the Tashlumim on the Shmini Atzeres, the first white line, as it says clearly in the Mishnah, that Mishalei Chag, Karban Chagiga, also Oilas Re'iyah. But Mishalei Chag Yom Tov Rishon Shel Chag, if you didn't bring it on the first day, Chagig as Kol HaRegel, meaning the Yom Tov Ha'achroin Shel Chag, Shmini Atzeres included. So why are we comparing Shavuos to Pesach, to Chag HaMatzos? Compare it to the Yom Tov of Shmini Atzeres, of Sukkos. Answers the Gemara, this is the klal. Whenever you have 2 options, Tofasta, Meruba, Loi Tofasta, if you try to seize the larger amount, you might end up with nothing. Tofasta Muat, yes, Tofasta. So therefore you compare it Dafka to Chag, Hamatzos. Will stop over here, God willing, to be continued.